Yes, we met in 2019. And Dr. Kohli, you met that day. So everyone knows everyone right now.
Thank you. Yes.
So,
Ishi ma'am, with your permission, like to start now. We've got about 70 plus attendees already.
oh, really? Oh, wow. Okay.
As you can
You
see,
are in the driving seat, Arjun.
right?
We are with you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm and hearty welcome to today's webinar, the 8th in our series on wheat-related disorders and heart disease. We're very happy to bring you luminaries from across the world today, right? And I will not take up much of your time. I would love to hand over the proceedings to our moderator, Dr. Arjun Dang, and to Ms. Anju Khosla of the Celiac Society of India, right? Anju ma'am, over to you first for a short introduction on the CSI, and then Dr. Dang can take it forward with the small introductions to the panelists themselves. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Arjun. On behalf of the Celiac Society of India, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our esteemed panelists and audience to what promises to be an extremely thought-provoking webinar today. The last couple of years fighting the pandemic have painfully highlighted the role of food in building our immunity. Having said that, it is also estimated that almost a third of the world's population is affected by wheat-related disorders. The Celiac Society of India, a not-for-profit organization, has made it its mission to increase awareness in the early diagnosis and management of wheat-related disorders, which manifest in many ways, mostly outside the gut, unlike common perception. Our 12-part webinar series is intended to help you join the dots in chronic ailments and the underlying risk factors, and also for helping the audience make appropriate food choices. For those of you who may have missed out on our earlier sessions, you may please visit our website, celiacsocietyofIndia.com, to access the recordings. We also urge you to become a member of the society. So you can subscribe to our newsletter called Wheat Views, and also stay in touch regarding upcoming events. Later this year, we shall be hosting an international symposium on wheat-related disorders, where we will be bringing global experts to a single platform to address one of the most underdiagnosed disorders with its nutrition and health impact on millions. Year 2023 has been announced as the year of millets by Prime Minister Modi and also endorsed by the United Nations. And at Celiac Society, we are undertaking various activities to promote this indigenous alternate grain. Millets, malnutrition and immunity shall be the focus for ISWD 2023. So do stay tuned in. And with that, I'd like to again thank you and hand over the baton to Dr. Arjun Dang. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Anju, and a very warm welcome once again to everybody here. And today we are indeed, we have with us luminaries in the field, and Dr. Tom, who almost everybody in the audience would have met before, and Ishi ma'am. We also have Dr. Kohli sir, Dr. Chopra, and also Dr. William Davis. And a big thank you for taking the time to join us to discuss such an important and interesting topic. And a very warm welcome. And I would quickly like to give a quick introduction on the topic, and then we can start with our questions also. I think, as usual, we are going to be short of time because with this topic, there are so many things that the audience wants to know. There are so many things that they should know also. I hope we have enough time. So without ado, I will get cracking. So in the work that I do, I run a pathology lab, and very often I get patients who come in who get wellness checks that have things like lipid profile and things like an HbA1c and other parameters to check their health. And a lot of times, the advice that we give to them is also pertaining to lifestyle and diet and exercise. But I think if there is one field where almost always when I'm answering queries, I do want a consult from a specialist is cardiac disorders. And especially when I see an elevated lipid profile and the traditional saying that there is that you should focus on diet and exercise, I think that is not even the tip of the iceberg right now. There is so much more research that's been done in the past and so many more things that the lay person needs to understand and incorporate in order to see what diet can actually do on their risk for developing any cardiac event is phenomenal. So without much ado, and to understand more about wheat-related disorders and heart diseases and how lifestyle and nutrition can impact these, let's start with the first question to Dr. Tom. And Dr. Tom, my first question to you is regarding the textbook chapter from wheat-related, the heartbreak of wheat-related disorders that was authored by you. I did read through it and extremely interesting. But if you could just tell us a little bit about the connection of the wheat-related disorders with heart health, and also this linkage between WRD and cardiac disorders, and set the stage for today's conversation, that would be great.
All within 3 minutes, right? Yes, of course. The first thing if you've been following this webinar series, this is part 10 of the 12-part series. You've heard this before, but the National Institute of Health tells us that 14 out of the 15 top causes of death in the world today are chronic inflammatory diseases. It's your immune system being activated, trying to protect you from something that is causing the inflammation that eventually manifests wherever your genetic and how you lived your life factors determines. You pull it a chain, it always breaks at the weakest link. It's at one end, the middle, the other end, it's your heart, your brain, your liver, wherever your genetic weak link is, and your antecedents. That's a fancy word that means how you lived your life. For example, if you eat tuna fish 2 or 3 times a week, you very likely have mercury toxicity because most of the tuna fish in the world has mercury. That's an antecedent. So it's your genetics and your antecedents that set the stage for where the inflammation is going to occur. In the world of cardiovascular disease, it was back in the 1870s that it was identified that cardiovascular disease was a problem of too many fats in the blood vessels, storage in the blood vessels. And it wasn't until 1986 that cardiovascular disease was identified as a chronic inflammatory disease, that it's really inflammation that's the problem, not the fats. It's the amount of inflammation. And if that's your genetic vulnerability, that's where you're going to develop a problem. And so we always need to look at where is the inflammation coming from. And if you've been following this series, you've heard in the past that Dr. Maureen Leonard at Harvard, she did a literature review of over 60 studies and identified that every human gets inflammation and leaky gut every time they eat wheat, every human. So wheat is gasoline or petrol on the fire, always causing inflammation. Basically, that's one of the contributors in wheat that is manifesting if you're genetically vulnerable as cardiovascular disease. Every human gets inflammation when they eat wheat.
So very, very interesting, Dr. Tom, and indeed inflammation is something that we'd like to discuss more and understand more about also. But we have Dr. Chopra, and my next question is to Sir. And Sir, I would like to understand from you your journey about from cardiology and hardcore cardiology. How did you get to being such an expert in the functional medicine space? And also, there is so much literature and so much information about cholesterol. What's the real story behind cholesterol, and how do you connect the dots with lipoprotein A, and a little bit more on that part as well?
Okay, the whole story started actually, when we're deeply involved in medicine, and we realized that whatever we are doing is not working in the long run, and whatever we do, the patients are still. And I realized that the angst of the patients, that we were just simply juggling medicines, adding 5 milligrams there or 5 milligrams there. And ultimately, a deep sense of, compassion rose inside me, that I wanted to be a true healer rather than just juggling, number one, a few medicines. And that's how this whole thing came, this whole compassion, that when I saw that what we could do and versus what was happening, then, inaction was not a possible, and some form of service has to be. So that night I sat and worked on my moral rectitude, and literally standing on the crossroad, that should I join the whole party of all the nonsense in big pharma doing, or should I just simply watch the evolution of a chronic disease like a twisted movie? Only difference was this is not a movie, this was real. So that's how it all started, that I have to find some other way out. And that's when I got in contact with my partner, Dr. Sanjay Sachdeva, and we opened a new place specifically for functional medicine, and it was doing very well. Unfortunately, we had to close it down, including some destination and residential sites because of the COVID pandemic. But we're still on it, and we're still being invited now to various places in Abu Dhabi, in Koh Samui, to work on the same concept.
Great. Thank you for that. So a little bit about the cholesterol and the lipoprotein and the connect also.
Okay, about cholesterol. Now, you see, the cholesterol is a very big story. Everybody thinks, if you talk about, if someone says that, why do you want to lower your cholesterol? They'll say, even the doctors will say, because it causes heart disease. And that's how everything started. Cholesterol is never meant to be the causator of heart disease at any point of time. So what people didn't know was that cholesterol does a lot of jobs here within the body. It makes your cell membranes. It also creates all the hormone bases. Your white matter, gray matter is made from cholesterol. The carriage of vitamin A, D, and K is made by cholesterol. And even the annulment of the lipopolysaccharide, which is the breakdown products of bacterial degradation, is taken care of by cholesterol. So, and then most importantly, I was surprised that about 70 to 80% of our patients didn't know that cholesterol was made in our body. And it came as a big surprise to them. I said, well, no, not just that. 70 to 80% of the cholesterol is made in our body, and only a 10-20% is actually seen on the food. So that is how the cholesterol story emerged. Then came the fact that there was people called good cholesterol and bad cholesterol, which makes me laugh now. We used to also say that, but there is no good or bad. It's like, there's no good or bad, because were it not for LDL, the cholesterol wouldn't be able to go to all the various places. And then the HDL does a good job by bringing back the unused cholesterol back to the liver for formation. So that is the main thing that people understood slowly. Then we understood the fact that LDL and HDL are basically carriers, or basically taxis, which are carrying a passenger called cholesterol, and they're not the same thing. The problem happens is that when the carrier gets either inflamed, or there's an autoimmune reaction, or there is oxidative stress, the carrier becomes bad and not the cholesterol. So then we found that there are two types of carriers, the type A and type B. The type A is a big, like a fluffy type of thing, where it's not bothering the arteries as it is going by, and doesn't cause a plaque or any problem. But the type B particle, which is like a spiculated thing, will cause a little bit of scratch in the arteries, and that's where the plaque comes in, and that's how it all happens. So now our aim would be to reduce or change your lifestyle in a manner that the type B particle should be converted into the type A particle. And in which case, I don't mind that even if the LDL is over 1 million, it doesn't matter then. So that's the way I try to explain to our patients of what to do and what not to do. And I think that's a good way of doing it. Only, you see, the problem is that when supposing someone dies, and you do a postmortem and you see cholesterol hanging around, and it gets the blame. It's like blaming the fireman for the fire. It's quite ridiculous to say that. How can you blame the fireman for the fire? And so this is really the thing that is happening, and understood. But even then, patients still do not understand or still don't want to believe, because everybody just says that cholesterol is the thing, and all the doctors are also pushing it. So that's the whole thing.
Very, very interesting, sir. And I will remember this, and the way you explained it is brilliant. So quickly moving on to Dr. Kohli also. Hi, sir. So my
Right.
question to you to start off would be similar to what I just asked Dr. Chopra, and usually very curious to know. And in our last call also, you told us how your own personal journey and starting from a backache that you had, and then finding a cure in your kitchen, and then how that got remedied basis your lifestyle and your diet change. And if you could just tell us a little bit about that. And also want to know how you got off statins through lifestyle modifications. And can a wheat-free diet be used to reverse heart disease? And is it a heart-friendly diet?
Okay. As we discussed last time, I mentioned a little bit about how I got into this. And that was, as you said, I had very severe backache. And that took 6 months to resolve, which I later realized was more because of a spasm of the muscles and very low vitamin D levels.
Okay.
And then I realized that, probably I was not getting the answer with the conventional medicines. So I branched into yoga and naturopathy, Ayurveda, and energy medicine, things like that, which of course corrected the whole thing. And then my own problem of coronary artery disease, when the treadmill was positive, when he did the angiogram, I had a 70% block in the LAD, which then I started all these things, which came down to 50 to 60%. Now, what I did was that first I took myself off wheat completely. Along with that, I stopped taking sugar. I stopped taking any milk. I cut down on rice as well, which I never liked anyway, very much. And along with that, I started increasing my intake of healthy fats like ghee and cold pressed coconut oil, extra virgin olive oil. And this was combined with stopping all refined food, all packaged foods, all preserved foods and all that. I tried to become as natural as possible as far as the diet was concerned. And to this, I added, as Dr. Tom keeps saying, exposure to chemicals. He said that every week you must take yourself off something or the other, which I started doing. So I'm off as much of chemicals as possible. I use wooden combs. I use chemical-free shampoos, chemical-free shaving cream, and things like that. So along with that, of course, then I started doing intermittent fasting and continued my yoga. And I try to do the home methods of detoxification as well, like, dry brushing, oil massage, jal neti, and things like that. So that has brought everything under control. It's 6 years since I had the earlier problem, as I mentioned. The coronary artery disease regressed to 50 to 60% rather than 70. I'm very energetic. I have no issues whatsoever. And this is what I would advocate for everybody. They should try to do that. I'm off statins. I'm off aspirin. I'm not taking any medicine whatsoever. My blood pressure is fine. Well, that's the long and short of it. So
Great.
you asked something else as well.
Yes, sir. I was asking you, can a wheat-free diet be used to reverse heart disease? And is a wheat-free diet actually heart-friendly? Your views on that?
Yes, of course, it is. It is definitely heart friendly. And we just heard Dr. Davis telling us that wheat contains that protein called amylopectin A, which is, of course, one. Then, of course, it contains WGA, it contains lectins, it contains gliadin, and so many other proteins which are harmful. And all of them basically cause, they have a very bad effect on the intestines. And as you're aware, as everybody's aware, I think, the intestinal lining, though it is very thin, that lining is protective. That gets damaged. And when that happens, then you get what we call as a leaky gut. Dr. Davis will tell us more about it. And this leaky gut, when it happens, then the normal process of digestion, which gives us nutrients and all that, that doesn't really happen very well. Abnormal chemicals and all that are produced. These go directly into the bloodstream, and they cause all sorts of inflammation in the body. So ultimately, it's inflammation which happens. So wheat is very inflammatory. Along with the leaky gut, what happens is that we develop deficiencies of so many things. Calcium, magnesium, and so many other things which are actually good for us. So all of these factors put together lead to heart disease as well. And also, if you permit, I would like to go back and to yoga again. Now, yoga tells us, that the gut and the entire system is actually controlled by the solar plexus chakra. Now, this has 10 petals, and each one petal signifies something or the other. One of them signifies digestion, another signifies circulation, the third signifies lung and the heart. You can see how well connected they are. So we actually known this for a long time. It's now scientifically proven that we get to know more about it. And of course, Dr. Davis has worked so much upon that. He, of course, would be able to tell us more about it.
Hi, Dr. Davis. My next question is to you. And I was waiting to get everyone's comments in and then come to you, because thank you so much for being here. And secondly, also, could you tell us a little bit about your best-selling book, The Wheat Belly, and also demystify this entire topic of wheat-related disorders and any cardiac diseases? And what kind of a take-home message would you have for the audience that is tuned in today?
Thank you. I'm very impressed with the knowledge in this group. You guys have done your homework. So I started this path when I set up a CT heart scan device, actually an EBT heart scan device many years ago, about 25 years ago. And I was shocked that the conventional efforts, such as a low-fat diet, low-saturated fat diet, high dose of a statin cholesterol drug, a baby aspirin, exercise program, and we help contribute these data to some of the clinical trials, does not work. Does not slow the progression of coronary disease. If by a coronary calcium score, that is this indirect index of the volume of atherosclerotic plaque in your coronary arteries, if you do nothing, it goes up 25% per year. If you engage in the conventional treatments, statin, cholesterol drug, baby aspirin, low-fat diet, et cetera, it goes up 25% per year. So I had thousands of people freaking out on me, and for which there was no conventional answers. The conventional approach does not work. So one of the things I added was to reject this idea that cholesterol test, the only truly useful value on a cholesterol panel, a lipid panel of the 4 values, is triglycerides. And that's because what became clear is the driving factor in progression of coronary disease is small LDL particles. VLDL, very low density lipoproteins, and small LDL. Small LDL is very unique. It persists for 5 to 7 days in the bloodstream as compared to 24 hours of a large LDL particle. It is very glycation prone, glucose modification. It's very oxidation prone. It's very adherent to the glycosaminoglycan structural proteins in the arterial wall. Once it gains entry to the arterial wall, it is very good at inciting inflammation. And so small LDL is a very different animal. Where does small LDL come from? And by the way, there are 55 clinical trials now that tell us that small LDL is a far superior predictor of cardiovascular events than this silly thing, this fictitious number called LDL cholesterol. So small LDL, it was clear. It was the driving factor in the progression of coronary disease. Where does small LDL come from? Well, there's only 2 groups of foods that provoke small LDL. This is not my data. This is Ron Krauss and other people at UC Berkeley and elsewhere. It's the amylopectin A of grains and sugars. So those are the only, it's not saturated fat, it's not total fat, it's not olive oil, it's not butter, it's not lard, it's wheat, grains, and sugars. And wheat and grains, it's the amylopectin A that drives us. So the liver is exceptionally good at taking sugars and the amylopectin A of grains and converting them to triglycerides, a process called de novo lipogenesis, the creation of fats from carbohydrates. Liver is very good at it. And so it makes triglycerides that some of which stay put in the liver, that's fatty liver, some of which are released into the bloodstream. But triglycerides can't exist as triglycerides because they're fats. They would block your capillaries if they did. So they're on the passenger, they're a passenger on proteins to make them water soluble or aqueous soluble. So those VLDL particles are both a direct cause for coronary atherosclerosis, also interact. So VLDL, very triglyceride rich, interact with LDL particles and contribute triglycerides to the LDL particle. There's a series of reactions that cause that LDL particle to become small. So that whole somewhat complex process began with consumption of the amylopectin A of wheat and grains and sugars. So when I started to remove wheat and grains and sugars from people's diets, I saw coronary disease regress. Just as Dr. Co has pointed out, you get regression of coronary atherosclerosis. You have obliteration of VLDL. You get triglycerides no higher than 60 milligrams per deciliter. In other words, you drop from 190 or 250 to below 60, because any triglyceride level above 60 milligrams per deciliter means you have an excess of VLDL. One of the great things about triglycerides on that cholesterol panel, even though the other three values are virtually worthless, triglycerides do tell you very well what the status is of your VLDL particles. That is the thing that causes coronary disease directly and interacts with LDL particles to cause small LDL particles. And so keeping triglycerides below 60 has been exceptionally powerful. And by the way, something we also have to be aware of is there are two things that cause intestinal permeability to be abnormal. It's a lethal combination. One is the gliadin protein of wheat. We know that with good evidence. Also, endotoxemia. That is the proliferation of fecal microbes like E. coli, Campylobacter, Klebsiella, et cetera, that have proliferated in the colon and then remarkably ascended into the 24 feet of small intestine. The small intestine is not well equipped to house fecal microbes, trillions of fecal microbes. And so when they die, of course, they only live for a few hours. When they die, especially gram-negative fecal microbes release their components of their cell wall, specifically endotoxin and other components. Endotoxin is able to penetrate the very permeable small intestine because it's not equipped to handle fecal microbes. It only has a single layer mucus barrier as compared to the two-layer mucus barrier of the colon. So endotoxin from these fecal microbes in the 24 feet of small intestine penetrate into the bloodstream, a massive trigger for inflammation, as others have pointed out, and insulin resistance. So to get control of coronary disease, one of the places we have to focus on is the gastrointestinal tract. And we are now able to very confidently identify this process, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, we say SIBO, with trillions of microbes in the small bowel releasing endotoxin, causing endotoxemia. So the combination of gliadin-induced intestinal permeability from wheat and grains, coupled with SIBO, which by my estimation in the US alone affects easily 150 million people, half the population. That's not my speculation. That is the evidence is well sorted out. That combination, wheat consumption and SIBO, is lethal and is a surefire way to generate coronary disease. Now, the good news is get control. Don't eat wheat and grains, don't eat sugars, and get control. One of the things I've been doing for this SIBO issue is restoring keystone microbes, two of them in particular, Lactobacillus reuteri and Lactobacillus gasseri. Those two are very good at colonizing the upper GI tract, unlike many other microbes that only colonize the colon. They colonize the upper GI tract. That's where the battle with SIBO occurs, right? And are very good at producing what are called bacteriocins, natural antibiotics effective against the fecal species, fecal microbes, like E. coli and Campylobacter and Pseudomonas. And so that combination, restoring those two microbes, has been miraculously far beyond my expectations. We do so, by the way, by using extended fermentation. We call it yogurt. It's not yogurt. It's a bacterial count fermentation system. And we did flow cytometry on our yogurts, fermented for 36 hours, 12 doublings, because microbes, of course, don't have no male-female microbes. They just double themselves. We allow these microbes to double 12 times. We count the microbes via flow cytometry. We get about 300 billion counts per half cup serving. And this, I call it SIBO yogurt. We consume this yogurt with some blueberries or whatever. And so far, of the 40 people we've done in a preliminary experience, 90% have converted to hydrogen gas negative. We verify SIBO by hydrogen gas testing and have enjoyed finally eradicating all residual abnormalities, maybe breaking a weight plateau, reducing hemoglobin A1C to below into the 4 range. All the things that were persistent and didn't respond, we're now seeing respond in light of addressing the microbiome.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Davis. I think Dr. Tom has
Yes,
Please,
thank
go
you.
ahead.
I just want to say to our audience that you need to go back and listen to what Dr. Davis said a few times, because he went quickly for us, and it's just pearls of wisdom that he has just identified how you reduce your risk of coronary artery disease by rebuilding the gut. Pearls of wisdom. So don't be afraid if you're overwhelmed by what you just heard with a lot of new words that you've not heard before. That's okay. Just go back and listen to it a couple of times and listen to the recommendations of how to begin to address this, and you'll do great. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tom. I echo those words, and I've been taking notes as well while listening to Dr. Davis. Thank you so much. So my next question is to Ishi, ma'am. And ma'am, so Dr. Davis was talking about the gut microbiome and the connect. So could you tell us a little bit more about this as well? And also from an aspect of nutrition, how can we use the correct kind of nutrition and supplementation when it comes to restore your cardiac health?
Yes, thank you, Arjun. And I think the connection between the gut, the microbiome disturbance called dysbiosis, and the leaky gut, and the whole inflammatory picture has been beautifully elucidated by all the speakers before me, and including Dr. Davis, who's done it in detail, that gliadin and lipopolysaccharides, one of the byproducts of the bacterial overgrowth, SIBO, can cause intestinal permeability and increase inflammation. Apart from that, from the nutritional perspective, also it causes oxidative stress. And that is, of course, one of the mechanisms by which coronary artery disease starts. And nutrient malabsorption. So when your gut is not is 100% functional, you are going to be malabsorbing certain nutrients, and it depends on who you are. You are genetically also predisposed to pick up or not pick up certain nutrients. So certain people will be deficient in vitamin Bs, B12. Some people could be in a combination of vitamin D and magnesium. And so it's not vitamin D really in the gut, but there is a mechanism by which it gets affected. Vitamin E, C, all of these various nutrients and macronutrients as well. You can see protein malabsorption, essential fatty acids. So essentially a nutritional compromised situation arises out of a poor gut. So that's one. And I do see these things in clinical practice. You do see them, I'm sure, in your practice. And one of the vitamins which are really directly connected to the gut microbiome is vitamin B12 and K, because most of the K2 is manufactured by the microbiome. And therefore, that's a critical one also for heart disease. And we were talking to Dr. Tom the other day, and he spoke at length about homocysteine and how deficiency of certain nutrients, vitamins, leads to the hardening of arteries through excessive homocysteine. And maybe that can be something which we can talk also if time permits. So yes, all of these things. And beyond that, it's of course, your management, a poor diet can lead to high sugars and high blood pressure, and alter the clotting and the coagulation properties of blood, and of course, rhythm disturbances. And we see it all. So there are several mechanisms by which these impact our risk to coronary artery disease. And the good news is that we, through the diet, like Dr. Kohli has just pointed out in his own personal story, there are several researchers to support these, that they can be reversed, and we can be in the driving seat to manage our heart disease, to prevent heart disease, and even if you have established disease, to reverse it and to halt the progression. So, a lot has been said about the gut microbiome. Dr. Davis has talked about the ingestion of good bacteria through yogurt, and they can be also done through your supplements, and adequate levels of vitamin D and certain others, magnesium, are critical to our risk, and also certain good fats. This has been a sad, commentary on our science and how we have perceived things, and the low fat brigade really depleted our levels of good fats, and we thought they were artery clogging, and a lot of damage has happened in the bargain. That in India we were using these fats like butter and ghee and all of those, and they have even coconut oil. They were abandoned for these reasons. So I think we need to bring back the good fats, the anti-inflammatory fats, the omega-3 fats, which can help us restore the balance and to reduce inflammation, and thereby impacting every aspect of coronary artery disease.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for summarizing that so well. Dr. Kohli has a point.
Yeah,
Please go ahead.
thank you so much, Mrs. Khosla. I just wanted to add that you already alluded to magnesium being very important. I think magnesium is an extremely important molecule, and wheat and refined foods, they're depleting it, because then these foods they extract the magnesium present in the body for their metabolism. So we are getting deficient in magnesium, and that has a huge impact on cardiac health, as well as so many other factors. Because in my own practice, I realized that when I start adding magnesium to patients who have palpitations, who have atrial fibrillation, apart from other things, apart from changing their diet habits and all, they're supplementing magnesium, they start improving. This is from clinical practice. But magnesium has so many roles in the body, including its relationship with vitamin D. Because vitamin D metabolizes to its active form only when magnesium is there in the body. If it is not, it does not get metabolized to its active form. And low vitamin D level is also now a contributory factor to coronary artery disease. So I think we have to be, it's very important for us, and that any cardiac patient, anyone with bad gut health, should also be getting supplements of magnesium. Unfortunately, it is difficult to check in the laboratory, but we can safely assume that we are deficient in it and supplement it.
Yeah. I think that's a
Yes.
very valid point, Dr. Kohli. Just like to say that one of the audience seems to be always wanting to do more, and in their enthusiasm can start supplementing, and sometimes these can go the wrong way. So do it under supervision. We've done it with vitamin E. Too much of vitamin E was given out as an antioxidant, and it behaved like a pro-oxidant by the end of it. So we need to, do it under supervision.
Correct.
Absolutely. Thank you, ma'am. So Dr. Chopra, coming to you next on this topic of supplementation, and we were discussing only earlier today about these fat-soluble vitamins like A, E, D, and most importantly K2 as well. So could you tell us a little bit about how these all of these play a very important role in supplementation?
Well, you see, first of all, there's a thing called what we call the calcium paradox. And the calcium paradox means that neither calcium or D has completely taken care of either osteoporosis or the atherosclerotic plaque. And this is the basic concept of that. So it's a very mysterious thing that there's a concurrent situation where there's a calcium deficiency in the bone and a calcium excess in the arteries. And the two major health concerns are this only. So how to resolve that? Nobody understood what is K2, because K2 was never, as a point, never taught to us in college or whatever. So there is only a K1, and K2 was converted. K2 was made by conversion into in the intestine. Now K1 and K2 have nothing to do with each other. It's a completely different game. K1 is found in all the green leafy vegetables, and K2 is found in all the fatty foods, as in eggs and as in all the good fats, etc., etc., etc. So it is also seen that K2 is so important by activating a protein called osteocalcin, which attracts the calcium to the bone and activates another protein called, which is matrix GLA protein, or MGP, which takes the calcium out of the arteries. So whether the K2 is less, the proteins become inactive. The calcium paradox again raises its ugly head, and decreases the bone density and increases in calcification. So K2 is absolutely essential for cardiac health. It's the only way where we can reduce all the calcification from our body, from the arteries, and that is how. So K2 is found mostly in all the fatty products, and that is why we need to do that. We always also talk about the French paradox, and everywhere. How come the French and the Portuguese and the Greeks and the Italians still are enjoying it? And Tom would also, agree with me that all of them, all the sin foods that we were taking are actually very important for us. So the K2 intake is inversely related to the arterial calcification. So that is very important, and I think we all have to find a way that we can increase the vitamin K2. I have a little slide which is showing the different aspects of K2, I think if you have one, and it is available as MK4 and MK7. One is synthetic and one is non-synthetic, and there are certain important aspects to it. And the MK4 is synthetic. It's also natural, but not the source. K2 for supplements, as extracting it from foods, is very expensive. So therefore, the MK7 is much easier to do because the dosage and the frequency is very dry. Now, the MK4, for example, has a very short life, half-life, and the divided doses has to be taken for about 3 times in a day, whereas the MK7 has to be used only once a day. Stability is much more in MK7. So I think what we need to do is to take the MK7, which is natural form. It can be found in many other things like natto, goose liver, hard cheese, soft cheese, egg yolk, butter, cheddar, and things like that. So please understand that without this, your calcium, the calcification in the arteries is not going to go away. And vitamin D, A play a very important role with it. So without vitamin D and vitamin A, K2 will not be able to do its job. Along with it also comes magnesium, along with it comes vitamin E. So you can imagine that this whole triumvirate is very important, that alone vitamin K2 is not going to help. It needs the help of D, it needs the help of A, it needs the help of vitamin E. So if you can show that slide there, it will be a little easier for people to see.
Sure. Arjun, do you have that slide that I shared with you before the webinar? I shared 3-4 documents with you. Is it possible to mirror them right now? So we'll just wait till Arjun responds to that probably.
Okay, anyway, to summarize that is that the vitamin K2 is terribly important for not just for calcification, but it has multiple actions in the body, including for cancers and child development. It's unbelievable the amount of jobs that vitamin K2 is doing. So please understand that this becomes a very important part of our dietary program, which has been ignored, and a lot of people haven't heard about K2.
Thank you. So would you like anything?
I'll do it later if you are done with this.
Okay, great. Sure. So Dr. Tom, coming to you next, and since we already discussed about supplementation and that aspect, I have also been reading up about intestinal permeability and the very famous intestinal permeability marker that is zonulin, and how that plays a very important role in your overall gut health also, and also affecting your overall well-being, even your cardiac health. Could you tell our viewers a little bit more about this topic?
Yes, the topic of leaky gut is a wonderful topic. It's leaky gut saves your life every day. It was our ancestors survived because their immune system in the gut had the ability to say, what is that came into the intestines in that food? That's a bug. That's a bad bug. I have to fight that bad bug. And so what the immune system would do in the gut is send a message up, make more zonulin. And what zonulin does is it opens the space between the cells so a little bit of water can come into the gut to wash out the bad bug. with the poop. That's the job of zonulin, is to open up the cells a little bit, some water comes into the gut and wash it out. And when you have a little bit of increased zonulin, it's like if you have mud on the driveway of your home, the driveway has some mud on it, and you turn on the garden hose and you're trying to wash the mud off, but it's stuck, it dried on the driveway. You have to put your thumb over the end of the hose to get a spray, and the spray will wash off the mud. That's the job of zonulin, is to wash out the bad bug that our ancestors may have gotten in the food they were eating. Those that didn't have that safety mechanism, they died, and they did not reproduce. So their children did not continue forward. Their lineage did not continue forward. Those that had that safety mechanism developed, they survived and they reproduced. So the genetics, generation after generation after generation, produces this zonulin. It's a good thing. The problem is, Professor Alessio Fasano at Harvard has identified two main triggers for excess zonulin. So zonulin's not bad for you. Leaky gut is not bad for you. Excess leaky gut is bad for you. And the two main triggers are the gliadin in wheat. No other food is like this, the gliadin in wheat, and as Dr. Davis talked about, LPS. Those are the two main triggers, according to Professor Fasano, who's teaching this at Harvard. He's the chair of pediatric gastroenterology at Harvard. This is what they're teaching their gastroenterologists. The two main things are gliadin in wheat and LPS, so that you get excess leaky gut. Now, that's the problem that contributes to the development of chronic inflammatory diseases. I will stop there.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tom. I'll come back to, there's a lot more to discuss in that. So Dr. Kohli, just coming to you next. And could you tell us a little bit more about cardiovascular health and common wheat-related disorders, anything to do with nutrition, or if you'd like to comment on any of the various things that we've been just discussing?
Yeah, I just would like to mention that when we talk of heart disease, we are talking basically of coronary artery disease. That is, blocks in the coronary arteries. Now, of course, wheat and wheat-related disorders do contribute to that as well. But there's so many other problems related to the heart, all of which can be affected because of that. And one is myocarditis, one is heart failure, atrial fibrillation. Atrial fibrillation basically means that the rhythm of the heart, basically the upper chambers, gets altered. And the heart does not beat at its normal, the way it should normally be doing. So these are all related to wheat-related disorders. And the basic concept behind that, of course, is, has already been pointed out by Dr. Tom and Dr. Davis, Dr. Chopra. We already know that. But basically what happens is that there's insulin resistance, and that is associated with endothelial dysfunction. This is technical, but I'd just like to very briefly explain. When there's excess glucose in the body, it is flowing in through the blood vessels. And the blood vessels have not been used to that level of sugar in the body. So they start getting damaged. This is called endothelial dysfunction. This dysfunction then contributes to other things like hypertension. It leads to heart disease, diabetes. Both diabetes and hypertension also contribute to heart disease. So there's a host of things which can happen in the heart. I'd just like to mention, if you permit, about an experience which I had with a patient who came with heart failure. Now, he had a prolonged history of constipation, bloating, and when he came to me, at that point of time, he had, of course, these marked symptoms. Along with that, his ejection fraction, that is, the pumping of the heart, had dropped to about 25%. He was in very bad shape. He could barely walk. He was very breathless. He needed a walker, and he had all sorts of other issues. Twice in the past, he had been hospitalized for severe anemia, that is, loss of blood. And the loss of blood had been checked by the gastroenterologist to be related to some bleeding inside. Now, there was nothing left for us to do, but I explained everything to him, and then we took him off wheat, we took him off sugar. Then, of course, we detoxified him. And following that, of course, we gave him a lot of vitamin C, IV vitamin C and all that. And then there was a remarkable change in his progress. He started walking himself, his backache disappeared completely. His heart function, of course, remained the same, but the swelling over the feet which he had, that also disappeared. So this just sort of told me that when you improve the diet and the lifestyle a little bit, then what happens is that you can correct these issues as well. Of course, there was only symptomatic improvement. The ejection fraction never improved, but subsequently he did well. He went for his walks and all that. So that was one. And similarly for atrial fibrillation, which I've already mentioned before in the past. So I think supplements of vitamin D, K2, as Dr. Chopra has also mentioned, magnesium under supervision, as Dr. Ishi has said, and of course, vitamin E, all of these should be taken under supervision. Vitamin A, of course, we have to be a little careful with, because you can't give too much of it. You can't give too less of it also. So be careful with these supplements. But I think most of these patients would require all that, because leaky gut has already been pointed out, and that is leading to a lot of vitamin and mineral deficiencies, which we need to correct. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. So, Dr. Davis, coming to you, and a little bit more about the wheat belly and what kind of impact it can have on overall health. And also, I would like you to help me demystify two very traditional sayings or learnings, as I might say. And even in my med school, I was taught similar to what Dr. Chopra was saying, that HDL is good cholesterol, LDL is bad cholesterol, and also another thing, that triglycerides and especially lipid profile is always supposed to be done in a 10 to 12-hour fasting state. Now, I've been going through various guidelines on this, and now they say that the lipid profile test is not supposed to be done in fasting mode. It should be done after you've had a meal or at any random time in the day. So I know I've tried to club in a lot of questions, but that's only in the essence of time. And if you could just help us with these answers and guidance on these.
This is a terrific conversation, by the way. The points made by Dr. O'Brien, for instance, are rarely heard elsewhere. So that's an incredible insight. Thank you very much. Well, so we talked about how it's VLDL, very low density lipoproteins, triglyceride rich, because of the consumption of the amylopectin A of grains and sugars, and the small LDL particles that result. And so what I tell people is take your lipid panel and cross it out with a black magic marker, because it's garbage. It's based on outdated science. We should have discarded the whole notion of cholesterol 40 years ago. It came from crude science, well intended, but crude science from the National Institutes of Health, in an effort to use cholesterol as an indirect marker, not the cause, but a marker for the lipoproteins, fat-carrying proteins in the bloodstream that cause coronary atherosclerosis. Yet it became perceived as the actual cause. And now the reason why this outdated concept and this outdated form of testing persists is because the pharmaceutical industry has managed to monetize it in a very big way. And it's been a very destructive path these last 50 years, just as the GLP-1 agonists like Wegovy, Ozempic, and Mounjaro are a very destructive class of drugs, because the FDA failed to ask what happens to people long term. And because when you lose weight, as you guys know, you lose about a third muscle. If you lose 30 pounds and 10, 12 pounds is muscle, you have impaired your metabolic rate, and you are guaranteed to regain the weight, which will be mostly fat. And you will be insulin resistant when you stop the drug. You will have more abdominal obesity, have more small LDL particles, more VLDL particles, higher blood pressure, higher C-reactive protein, higher other inflammatory measures. You'll be and you're more prone to breast cancer, osteoporosis, low testosterone, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, coronary disease, stroke, etc. So same thing with cholesterol. This outdated paradigm has led us down this path because it was profitable for the pharmaceutical industry. So I'm so thrilled that you guys are talking about this, that it's the amylopectin A of wheat. And by the way, the amylopectin A in other grains too. It's not just wheat, it's other grains also, as well as sugars, including fructose, that triggers formation of VLDL, that in turn creates small LDL. That is the key. So I took wheat and grains out of people's diets and sugar for the sake of reducing small LDL particles, because these people had coronary disease in my cardiac practice. And what took me by surprise was people would come back and they'd say, and this I did not anticipate, this goes back about 15 years now. They come back to the office and say, you didn't tell me I'd lose 73 pounds. You didn't tell me my hemoglobin A1C and blood sugars would drop so much I had to stop my insulin and my 3 other diabetes drugs. You didn't tell me that my arthritis would improve dramatically. I could stop my arthritis medications. You didn't tell me that my eczema would recede. You didn't. In other words, I started to see unintentionally, inadvertently, a complete change in landscape of health by removing this thing called wheat and grains. And as you guys now know, wheat of today is not the wheat of 30 years ago. It's not the wheat of the Bible. It's not the wheat of the prehistory. It is something completely different. It is a 42 chromosome, 18-inch tall, high-yield semi-dwarf strain that is extremely different. It's a creation of a laboratory, in essence. And this thing, unintentionally, the agricultural scientists and geneticists who created this plant didn't do it to screw with us. They did to increase yield per acre to feed the hungry in the world. And they succeeded in doing that, but they inadvertently amplified all the toxic effects. They increased the wheat germ agglutinin content that binds minerals, as Dr. Chopra and Dr. Kohli have pointed out. So wheat germ agglutinin content, a very toxic compound in the human gastrointestinal tract. They increase the I'm sorry, I meant to say phytates. Phytates bind the minerals. Wheat germ agglutinin, which is highly inflammatory, they increase that content because these are very good at pest resistance for the wheat plant. So they unintentionally increase the gastrointestinal and other toxic effects of these grains. That's what we have now as modern wheat. I'm not sure I answered all your questions.
Great, thank you, Dr. Davis. So my last one was again regarding should a lipid profile test or this VLDL test or the particle size test be on a fasting state? That is when the individual hasn't eaten for over 10 to 12 hours or overnight fasting, or should this blood test be done at any time as a random test? Because obviously we are all aware that triglycerides do increase significantly after any kind of a fatty meal. And is there something that you would like to guide us on this about?
Yeah, that gets really confusing because it depends on when you draw a non-fasting sample. So in other words, if I eat a mixed meal that contains fats as well as carbohydrates, the initial rise in triglycerides in the first few hours is due to the chylomicron flood. That's how we digest fats. And then given a few more hours, there's that process we mentioned of de novo lipogenesis, the liver's conversion of carbohydrates to triglyceride-rich particles like VLDL. So it's a two-phase process if you eat a mixed meal. First chylomicrons, and then VLDL. And so you really need to know when it was drawn and what was eaten. And so fasting is just a convenience. So if you do draw non-fasting, you really need to understand what that person ate and when they ate it to make sense at it. But I'll tell you, in practical life, if you are wheat grain free and sugar free, the VLDL particles are essentially eliminated. And so that postprandial value doesn't have the same kind of consequence as somebody who consumes a regular diet.
Sure, very useful, Dr. Davis, and I'll certainly keep that in mind. And next moving.
May I just add to that, first of all, I was trying to say everybody feels that vitamin A should be very careful about. I think that's overrated, and vitamin A is not such a bad thing. Because we have seen in the past that, every sort of 4 to 6 months, little children were given anything about 100,000 international units, and for adults about 200,000 units. And it's not all that. And I think if one takes 100,000 daily, negative effects may not happen. Currently, what we say is 3,000 for males, 2,300 for females, and 4,300 for pregnant women. So no adverse effects are seen. Even up to 25,000 daily, I have never seen any problems. So that's one point which I wanted to make.
Thank you.
So it's not all that bad. I think we just made a big deal about vitamin A. Because, vitamin A is so much part of the system of K, D, everything. So without that, they don't function well. And I think the other thing that you were talking about is whether I've always done fasting and postprandial results for everything, whether I'm doing on insulin, measuring the amount of insulin, or measuring the amount of whatever. I think it should be done both fasting as well as postprandial, so that every man's reaction is different based on their insulin resistance and based on what they're eating. So I think it's essential to do both.
Dr. Dan, can I make a point
that's
about
very interesting. Please.
One of my pet projects is, it's going to sound off topic, but it's not. That is,
Please do.
so restoring this microbe, Lactobacillus reuteri, Reuteri, named after the German microbiologist who discovered it in a woman's breast milk in 1962, Dr. Gerhard Reuter. Well, over the last 50, 60 years, almost all of us have lost this microbe because while it's very good as an antimicrobial in the setting of SIBO, it's also very susceptible to common antibiotics like amoxicillin. So if somebody took amoxicillin 30 years ago for an upper respiratory infection, for instance, you've lost all your reuteri. So it's almost disappeared from the human microbiome, even though it's ubiquitous in mammals and in indigenous populations unexposed to antibiotics. So we've lost this microbe. There's very good evidence out of MIT. We've tried to corroborate this through our animal and human clinical trials. We're having some troubles with the oxytocin ELISA, but nonetheless, you restore this reuteri, specifically ATCC PTA6475 strain, and perhaps some other strains. One of our research projects is to define all the strains of reuteri that actually share this effect. You restore reuteri to the human microbiome, colonizing the upper GI tract. It sends a signal to the brain to release oxytocin. And oxytocin is having some incredible effects. The social effects, an increase in empathy, an increase in generosity, acceptance of other people's opinions, but also physical effects. One of the great effects of oxytocin is suppression of appetite and the stimulation of regrowth of muscle. So as you all know, we lose about a third of our muscle as we age. It comes back. Now that's skeletal muscle. Now we don't know, the myocardium, the heart muscle, is filled with oxytocin receptors. Could this mean that restoration of endogenous oxytocin, not exogenous, intranasal or sublingual, but endogenous oxytocin, could that be key to the diseases of myocardium, like cardiomyopathy, congestive heart failure, et cetera? And so I think I'm seeing positive effects on, as well as oxytocin increasing muscle, which increases metabolic rate and helps you lose abdominal visceral fat. So we're seeing some incredibly powerful effects just from restoring this one keystone microbe, Lactobacillus reuteri.
That's so interesting.
Thank you, Dr. Davis, for that. Ma'am, coming back to you, if you have any comments on what Dr. Davis has just enlightened us about, and also a little bit about he's obviously told us about the harmful effects of sugar on the overall cardiac health, but there's also a lot of discussion regarding fructose, and fructose is normally found in some beverages and other food items as well. So could you tell us a little bit about that? And Dr. Chopra also has a point that he wants to share.
After
Please go
you,
ahead,
Dr.
sir.
Chopra?
No, as you carry on, I'm very, fructose is our biggest enemy, and I'd like to talk about that. See, fructose actually is of two sorts. One is the industrial fructose, which is found anything which is preserved, processed, packaged, or transported. Then that is, of course, it's not even coming into the issue. I don't even want anybody to have anything which is industrial fructose. The other part is fruit. Now, fruit has a big, controversy. Fruit sugar is 100% fructose, and this 100% fructose is, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't eat fruit, because food has very, very good, polyphenols and all the other things. So fruits are good, and somehow the other big pharma has now convinced us to eat fruit on an empty stomach, by which the fructose goes straight to the liver and causes the fatty liver. So in our past, if you remember, our grandfathers and great grandfathers gave us fruit right after a meal. So that is what point I want to make, that you must eat the fruit after, and give yourself a period of 6 weeks or so to get rid of the fructose out of your system, and then you can start with the low fructose foods and then slowly build it up. Now, Big Pharma and many other charlatans have been trying to fool us, or fool the whole public, which I want everyone to hear, is that they give a person a large amount of orange juice, pomegranate juice, and watermelon juice, and after 2 hours they measure the blood sugar, and the blood sugar has not gone up more than 120, and they say, see, all these buggers are trying to fool us, and fructose is not a problem. What they don't know is that fructose is not metabolizable. It doesn't enter the bloodstream, so you cannot measure it. But since you already had it, where does it go? Into the fatty liver. And I think this is one very important question which I want the audience to hear, that fructose is a big killer. It has to be done carefully. And please understand that the food should not be taken on an empty stomach. Everybody is doing that. Sorry to put my thing. I just wanted to.
Thank you for giving me a heads up on that. Yeah, I think my comments would really stem from the fact that I have worked in a heart hospital literally for 7-8 years, dealing with problems with dyslipidemia and cardiovascular disease. And I was always, sometimes puzzled that, these things don't add up. Dietary cholesterol from food, from eggs, was just not explaining lipid profiles. They were so contrary. People who were having 2 or 3 eggs with the yolk had normal lipid profiles, and people who were eating very, very frugal vegetarian diets were having high LDLs, etc., etc. So clearly, today we understand all the reasons for those things, including, one more observation was the HDL. The HDL was sometimes the only risk factor, a low HDL in a person's profile to, suggest why this person got coronary artery disease. And I used to have massive, conversations with preventive cardiologist friends that, tell me what is a risk factor. This person is a non-smoker, does not take alcohol, does not have belly fat, is not, BMI is normal, eats only home food. Where is normotensive? Why did he have a coronary event? No, he has a low HDL, etc. But then we were trying to work on the low HDL, and it never added up. We had athletes. My own husband had low HDL, and nobody can do more exercise as an individual than him. He's an ultra athlete, and his HDL was low, so it was not adding up. Having wine, doing correction of belly fat helped, but it wasn't really showing results. But yes, when we took off people of the wrong grains, which includes wheat, corn, soya, and oats. These are the 4 forbidden grains in my practice. And we saw almost a consistent pattern of elevation of HDLs year by year, from 38 to 40 to 45. And, and my own HDL used to be around early 40s, and today it's like up to 65, 70. And I haven't done anything in my lifestyle except change the grains. So clearly, I'm tempted to say that the grain changer is the game changer. And that's the new, my punchline. And to also, highlight the fact that it impacted my practice so much that my book, The 4G Code to Good Health, is basically talking about girth, that's visceral fat, and glucose, gut, gluten, and glucose, and as the key contributors to coronary artery disease and ill health today. And to answer your question and take up from what Dr. Chopra said about fructose, yes, fruits and vegetables are central to a heart-healthy diet. There is no doubt about it. Fruits are not only fructose and glucose, but fruits are also hydration and phenolic compounds and bright colors, all of which are extremely important and critical to manage heart disease. So there has to be a sort of an understanding that how much and who should be having what. So as a rule of thumb for anybody who's listening, all I would say is that don't overdo fruits because they have sugars. And in my practice, I don't know, people are taking it empty stomach and all right, they're pretty all right, and they are taking. So I think what it boils down to, Dr. Chopra, is that, as long as you don't overburden your system and don't, take fruit juices, take fruits as a whole. We know that excessive fruit consumption is connected with inflammation, insulin resistance, high uric acid, and, the fatty liver that has been spoken about. So just don't go crazy about having too many fruits. And there is something to be said about fruits as a, because they have so much goodness, they are also prebiotics, etc., to do what I call an alternate day fast, which means that day you don't have anything else but fruits and vegetables, maybe alternate day. That's in science also been associated with lowering risk of all the chronic degenerative diseases. So that way you can up your quotient of fruits on those days. where you eat no other form of carbohydrate. And and also, high fructose corn syrup has been spoken about as a villain. It is almost like in the 1970s introduced in our diets through all the packed food and the drinks. And clearly, we've seen up from the 1970s now what is happening to us with respect to all the epidemics and metabolic syndrome. So there is no room and there is no tolerance for high fructose corn syrup. Absolutely no. And and lastly, something to be said, if you're talking about heart disease and not talking about trans fats, that will be incomplete. So trans fatty acids entered our diets around the same time in the late 50s, 60s, and we've seen 20 years later the epidemics of coronary artery disease, etc. They are atherogenic, they are inflammatory, and they are a part of our diets whenever we pick up hydrogenated fats, margarines, or processed foods, or even foods which have been oils which have been high heated and like in fried food. So trans fats also, we have a zero tolerance policy for that, and the legislation today is in place even in India around trans fats. So I would, I think in my practice, I just begin telling people, you think you're all eating healthy, but you start your day with a combination of, say, tea with sugar and milk, and then you put a few biscuits because the doctor has said, oh, you will have acidity and therefore you can't have tea empty stomach. So you just put the flour, you put refined flour, you put trans fats and sugar, all that we are talking about as contributors to disease and pro-inflammatory foods. So it gives them a wake-up call. And so then what should we have? And then, okay, please have some nuts and dry fruits. And, so these are practical things which I'm sharing with you in my practice. And then what happens is, oh my God, the surgeons have told us, we've had a heart attack. Don't you know, you're giving us fats. How can we have almonds? How can we have walnuts? How can we have, these are full of cholesterol and all of that. So there we go all over again, busting those myths. So I think we are today in a much better place, but I have seen this journey since I was there from the 90s and 2000s. So I think the connection with the gut helps us really join all the dots very, very beautifully.
Yes, good.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, Dr. Kohli.
Yeah, thank you so much for your observation regarding diet. I feel that we, despite all that which we've said and what we keep doing, we are all accumulating a lot of toxins inside our bodies. And detoxification is something which we often tend to forget. Of course, our body has built-in methods of detoxification, but all of that we may or we may not be exercising. So I feel detoxification is a very important part of it. And my question is to Mrs. Khosla, that whatever diets would you prescribe to help us detoxify our bodies?
I, in fact, just said that diets which help you detoxification would also start with supporting a good microbiome. So diets which support a healthy microbiome and starting from a cleanse. And so that's a whole subject in itself. But yes, a diet which is rich in good fats, in butter, ghee, coconut oil, in terms of antioxidants and phenolic compounds, rich in vegetables, brightly colored. The favorite diet here that we refer to is a rainbow diet, which includes a maximum number of brightly colored vegetables and fruits, and also certain amounts of things which support the gut, like I said, which could include bone broth or certain kinds of gums which are healing for the gut, and so several aspects, certain spices, etc., and lots of fluid and water to hydrate and to cleanse. And so I would say we need the detergents and the water and the oil as cleansers. So we pick those best ones in the diet, and keep also giving digestive rest is very important. So one of the best ways to calm the gut is to give it rest and give more consistency wise liquid diets, and allow the body to work as little as possible. And today fasting has been acknowledged and has found its place as intermittent fasting or certain, food, water fast, etc., which also help in detoxifying. So if you do a combination of things, and of course, avoiding alcohol and avoiding processed foods and processed meats and minimizing sugar and taking better forms of sugar would be my way of doing it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I think I'm getting really good at this. I managed to predict this an hour and a half back that we'll be short of time. And yet we are again with a lot of more things to discuss. So going to ask for a round
Arjun, before we move on,
concluding comments. Yes.
just that I have given you my perspective, but would be happy to have inputs from all the other panelists as well, if I missed.
Absolutely. I was just coming to that, and maybe a quick comment or like a take-home message from everybody in the group, and that you would like our audience to take home today. Starting with you, Dr. Davis, if there's anything else you missed out on that's integral to today's conversation.
It's sad, isn't it, that we have to say reject all dietary guidelines to be healthy. We're never going to hear them apologize. We're never going to hear something like the USDA say, we made a mistake. We're sorry. We contributed to the worldwide epidemics of obesity and type 2 diabetes and autoimmune disease and cognitive impairment. We're sorry. We take it all back. We're never going to hear that because of the liability and the loss of credibility and who knows, lawsuits, right? And so we have to think for ourselves. That's why I'm so thrilled that you guys really are on top of things. This is a terrific conversation, but it means we've got to close our ears to the message of dietary guidelines. We've got to ignore, sadly, American Heart Association. They still cling to this. They actually said this based on the clinical studies performed in the 1950s and 1960s. We stick by our advice to cut saturated fat, which is ridiculous. And so we've got to think for ourselves. So I'm so thrilled to hear you guys talking like this.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Davis. So Dr. Tom, Dr. Kohli, Dr. Chopra, anything from your side?
Well, I would just like to add, we've heard so much, just to add that we should not forget, the ancient sciences which we have been taught, especially in India, that yoga and the concepts of Ayurveda. What I'm noticing is that whatever was predicted some 5,000 years back is now being actually proved scientifically. All Dr. Davis's work is now coming to fruition. Though these sort of things were predicted a long time back, of course, they did not know the reason, they did not have names for those things. But they did say that the digestive system is one of the most important systems of the body. If a digestion is good, then you are healthy. That's what they said. So my message would be that we should stick to those principles also and do it in our daily practice like yoga, pranayama, and meditation and all that. Because all these go a long way in helping us. Oxytocin, I think, increases with meditation as well. So these, along with what has been discussed, should be the guiding point for all of us. This is my take on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I would say that, we should create a situation where fasting versus starvation. See, fasting is encoded in our DNA, so we can't run away from that. So once a week or once in 10 days, I have always practiced a 24-hour fast. And this 24-hour fast has done multiple benefits to me. Now I am including a little bit of bone broth during my fast. That means I don't want anybody to take bone broth from the beginning, but because once your whole system is agreed upon, later we bring in the bone broth. But we must do a 24-hour fast very often, which is really helping us a lot. And many people, who can't do it, I have introduced a new word called break a fast meal. That means on the 20th hour, we can give them a small smoothie or a little boiled egg or whatever, and then complete the whole thing. So that would be one important thing that I would like to talk about, because it is in our DNA and we must honor it.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Tom, any concluding remarks from your side?
Yes. First, we can tell by looking at Dr. Chopra that he appears to be in really good shape, but his once in a while fasting hasn't done anything for his hair. So,
the thing is that better a bald head than no head at all.
Oh, there you go. There you go. So I started this show with the reference to inflammation. And what you've heard in this last 90 minutes is overwhelming for most people. Do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. And they're all very valuable points. But it'll take you 6 months to a year to implement all of this, learning one thing at a time, taking one step at a time. The key is that you're on the journey, you're on the road. We've all heard that the journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step, right? So the key is to recognize there's no magic pill that reverses cardiovascular disease. It's changing the lifestyle that caused the cardiovascular disease. And to change your lifestyle is going to take time. So have patience with yourself. Allow yourself to make mistakes and don't beat yourself up about it. You know, just do your best. Keep listening to people like our 3 cardiologists here today, the Celiac Society of India. Please support the Celiac Society of India. I put a post in here, some may not have read it, during this show, that everyone here donates their time today. No one is selling anything, but we're not just handing you things. I'm asking that you go out in the world and you talk to your family that has cardiovascular problems and send them the link to this show and suggest they listen to the show. Help make the world a better place. That we've the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of us. The 7 of us have given you our time and our knowledge with joy and happy to do it. But please pay it forward to those that are important to you in your life. Share this message, and you will find that you're a better person for doing it, that you will feel a little more fulfilled because you're sharing this critically important information. And last thing is to be kind to yourself. Keep walking forward one step at a time. You're on the right journey. Thank you so much for being here today.
Very well said, Tom. Very well said.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Dr. Davis and Dr. Chopra and Dr. Kohli and Ishi ma'am and Dr. Tom. And over to you, Arjun, and you can give concluding remarks and then conclude the session.
I'm very tempted, Arjun, sorry.
Please,
While you
please
were
go
talking,
ahead.
I just thought of this one-liner that we always say the way to a man's heart is through the stomach. So quite literally, we are all saying the same thing. So the way to a person's heart is through his gut. So.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. This has been a very enlightening session, and I really cannot add any closing remarks to this other than saying this was the 8th of 12, and I'm sure that some of these topics merit a discussion on their own weight, you know, and we can always go beyond the 12. But thank you all for being here today and sharing your expertise. And it's great. You guys have actually turned all of conventional knowledge on its head. It's going to take a while to sink in, very honestly. And I hope that's the seed we have planted today. So thank you all very much for doing what you do best. Thank you, and have a great weekend ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye. Have a good day.
Everyone.
Bye.